Welcome to Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom, a podcast where we take your favorite series seriously. I'm Chris Baker.
And I'm Tom Flynn. We're going from the beginning and looking at what made Canada's premier superhero team work, what didn't work, and taking a romp through a lesser read but much loved realm of the 616.
We start today with an introduction of another voice on the podcast, and that's my cat, Athena. She is 9 years old and is very needy, and I can't record at home without her barging in. So if you hear her in the audio, please know that she is loved and cared for. She is just a very, very needy chunk.
Cat introduction aside, we move on today to Alpha Flight number 5, beginning our run of issues that focus on individual team members and continue their origin stories. This episode will be picking up with Puck, recuperating from the injuries Marina gave him back in issue number 2 when she ripped his insides to the outside. This sidelined Puck and Dr. Michael Two Young Men, aka Shaman, from the adventure with the Master we covered last episode.
So this is our first real look at Puck as a focal character, and the cover really nails it. It's the standard red and white Alpha Flight logo, and from the corner box where there's Shaman and Puck next to him, Puck leaps out of the corner box and does these elaborate flips and cartwheels and whatnot all the way across the page, and the text says, "And now, Puck!" And he's got a big smile on his face. It's a lot of energy. It's a lot of fun. It's a good use of the space. And I think it's really memorable. And Tom, there's one more memorable thing about this cover. The letters that say Puck, they have hair. There's hair coming out of the letters. It extends from the outside of the letter, like into the panel behind it. The letters look like an old bar of soap at a fraternity shower, Tom. I'm never going to forget these letters.
I really enjoy how much this cover, like you love this cover so much, and then we get to Puck.
And then the letters are there at the bottom of the page just waiting to suck. And I know it every time. I'm like, oh, this is such a fun cover. Hair.
He has this little eye twitch going on as he describes the hair, the hairy letters. It's as someone who does not know what a bar of soap looks like in a fraternity shower. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm really glad for having not gone through that experience at this particular juncture in time.
You know, when I showed my 7-year-old the cover of Alpha Flight number 1, she said she didn't like the hairy one. And I said, oh, that's Sasquatch. And she cut me off and said, no, not the orange one, him. And she pointed to Puck. So apparently the hairy is like very noticeable to small eyes.
Setting aside Chris's hang-ups surrounding hair, the cover looks really fun.
Yeah, well, looks can be deceiving, Tom. So, issue number 5, What Fools These Mortals Be, written and drawn by John Byrne, colored by Andy Yanchus, edited by Denny O'Neill. Astute listeners will notice that this is the same creative team as issues 1 through 3, and these creators will work on every issue of Alpha Flight until number 29, when writing duties are handed off to Bill Mantlo, and art duties go to a pre-Hellboy famous Mike Mignola.
Which I did not know. I think that's really cool.
The letterers change often, and we'll note that. This one was lettered by Tom Orzechowski. The entire run of 1 through 29 being done by the same writer and art team is not something you get a lot of, and it really helps set the tone of what Alpha Flight will be about, because John Byrne's art is great. I got zero complaints about John Byrne's art in any one of these. It's his story. That's where I get complaints.
So we open with Michael and Judd being Puck, at the hospital in Albany, Ontario. Between his world-class surgeon skills and mystical medical techniques, Michael has rapidly stabilized Judd's injuries. Michael is worried that Judd is experiencing more pain than he should, to which Judd replies, I'm not going to do the Puck voice. It's yours.
Fine, but you get all the French. I'll be fine. Pain and I are old friends, eh? Goes hand in hand with being built like I am. In this issue, he's still healing from these injuries, and he's pushing himself too hard too fast, so it's kind of hard to separate out the pain Judd is feeling from his injuries and the pain that he feels from existing. So, for those of you who don't know much about dwarfism, one of the things you should know is that it apparently hurts. Like, constant physical aches and pains in the body are a hallmark of life for people who experience the world this way, and John Byrne writes Puck as a straight-up dwarf dude who has learned to do amazing things, both physically and mentally, and spent his life adventuring in defiance of his physical experience. And in issue number 32, Bill Mantlo will change that.
Look, there's no point in suffering twice by worrying about what's coming later. We can leave Mr. Mantlo aside for, I think, the rest of this episode. The nurses are all on Twitter and doting over Judd. Memorable nurse quotes. I just want a 6-pack of Judds to take home with me.
Wow. Hey, Nurse What's-Her-Name just can't get no satisfaction.
And that nurse is drawn older than the rest, so I assume she would appreciate that Stones call out.
Another one says, he's a charmer, all right. He talks like a barroom brawler, but he's reading Shakespeare.
Does she know that they let anybody read Shakespeare? It's not like there's like a rule or a license or a permit needed. Although Canada and the 616, maybe there is.
Another expresses awe that she got to work with Michael, and I bet that would really piss off secret agent linebacker superhero Dr. Walter Langowski, because Michael is the hardest working member of Alpha Flight, and everybody knows his name, but Walt is probably like smarter in very specific ways and more accomplished in other ways, and nobody knows who he is.
Yeah, we've covered this before. I'm not a huge fan of Walt's.
He has his moments. Hello, Athena. As Michael leaves, the older nurse comes in to give Judd a sponge bath, to which he says, another one? You chicks must think I'm about the dirtiest guy in the hospital, eh? Well, come on in, sweet thing. And this time, let me tell you about the time I went tiger hunting in Nepal.
So we smash cut to some smashing. No, actually we smash cut to later that night when Judd is wincing in pain and unable to focus past it this time. When no one answers his call button, he gets out of bed to find out why, only to find an empty nurse's station. Noticing a quiet and sneaky movement in the stockroom, Judd investigates and finds a nurse about to shoot up, rubber hose and all.
It's like just like a Dare commercial. And I wonder how much readers at the time would have recognized exactly what was going on from this panel because of Dare. I have strong feelings about Dare, but this is not a Dare podcast. This is an Alpha Flight podcast. The next morning, Puck shows off his skills by using his stature and nimble movements to sneak past all the daytime staff back into the storeroom. Finding the liquid painkillers, Judd realizes the bottles have been cut in strength. While not addressed, it seems to be the reason why the pain shots they're giving him aren't working, because someone is diluting the painkillers and selling the uncut stuff that they stole.
Judd is suddenly interrupted by the approach of a delivery boy, so he does some serious backflipping and leaping to get up and out of sight. This is obviously not great for a man with severe torso stitches whose intestines were cosplaying as his skin not too terribly long ago.
Too far.
Nope, exactly where it needed to be. Puck goes straight to the chief administrator's office and asks him to have security look the other way for 48 hours while he, Puck, tries to root out the drug ring. The admin guy agrees against his best instincts because Puck is a member of Alpha Flight, which begs the question, how much does the public know about Alpha Flight at this point?
We are, by now, dare I say, baby experts on Alpha Flight history until this point, and there's been precious little mention of how they interact with the public, other than that TV shot when that one guy with his name and his own Marvel wiki listing.
I don't believe that at any point Puck was visibly part of Alpha Flight. He was on Beta Flight up until recently.
Yeah, that was before he had joined. Yeah, we haven't seen how the press have covered them since issue 1, so interesting.
Yeah. Well, setting that aside.
Before we move on from the chief administrator, I want to say that we've established that Puck has a disconnected mustache and a chin strap beard, and the admin guy has a full beard and mustache, but no sideburns to connect it to his head hair. So it seems that John Byrne does not like to draw sideburns and will draw a man with literally every other permutation of hair, so long as it doesn't include any goddamn sideburns.
Except for Wolverine, who has nothing but sideburns. So maybe only Wolverine gets to have sideburns. And
he has sucked up all the sideburns that John Byrne could have ever possibly have drawn, and they all had to go onto Wolverine.
Works for me.
So we are now on page 11 of the book, and Puck finally gets into his uniform.
Oh, did we forget to mention that he's done everything, including meeting with the chief administrator in a hospital gown and no underwear.
Flop, flop, flop.
I mean, maybe that's how the admin knew he was in Alpha Flight.
Because he knows that Alpha Flight has 5 U's. So Puck pokes around.
Word choice.
Sees the nurse from the night before delivering drugs to a loser in a van, jumps in the van, busts up the drug ring. When a bad guy calls him a midget, Puck says, "Hey, if you don't mind, not a midget, eh? First off, we're called little people these days, and second, I'm not a midget, I'm a dwarf. The condition is called achondroplasty. It involves lack of growth in all the long bones, eh? but you probably know that, right? As he doublefoot kicks the bad guy in the face. So this makes Mantlow's later retcon even more tone deaf. It's right there on the page with medical terms and everything. And I don't get how he moves from this to Judd is a very tall man cursed to shrink down to dwarf size, and it's the extra mass in him that makes him hit so hard.
I mean, it's probably because Mantlo didn't feel like Byrne's version was superhero-y enough.
I'm going to end up shaking my fist at the sky and crying, Mantlo! a lot during his run.
I can't wait. Having overexerted himself, Judd manages to phone for police help just before he passes out and, almost dies again.
He comes to in the hospital. The chief admin and cop guy are all high fives and handshakes for having busted up a dope ring.
Dope. What is it, 1983 in here?
Yes.
Yeah, it
is.
It is. Okay.
So the chief admin guy tries to push a sleep shot onto Judd, and Judd suddenly cold cocks him in the face with his fist. Having realized that this was way too convenient to find the losers his first night out, Judd assumed that Chief Admin was involved in providing cover for the whole operation. Checks the bottle, sees the shot was not, in fact, a sedative. It was insulin, designed to kill without showing up on an autopsy.
So Judd's a pretty knowledgeable guy, street smart, tough, knows how these things work. He also doesn't have a soft spot for drug users. I will also point out, though, that all of that said, knowing that insulin will both kill a person at the right level and also not show up on an autopsy doesn't really come from street smarts per se.
That comes from being a Canadian special operative, I think.
Yes, I would. I simply submit to you that Judd's wet work skills might be equivalent to his acrobatic skills.
So you said that he doesn't have a soft spot for drug users. The actual quote here from him is, I've got no real sympathy for a junkie like Daly, but you're worse than a junkie. You create junkies, Doc. That makes you about the lowest slime I can think of, eh? Guess I'd better call the desk and have them send Sergeant McNamara back. Seems like he didn't pick up all the garbage. Feeny. In no way am I defending prescription drug abuse or using drugs at work, particularly important work like nursing in a hospital, nor am I defending stealing drugs from the hospital to sell on the street. Puck was right to get people arrested and to stop what was going on. But
Puck is a narc. Narc is a state of mind, not an action, and Puck's state of mind would put him at ease with Nancy Reagan. Remember, 1983.
I wonder if the anti-drug angle is buying some Comics Code Authority goodwill for all the sex and crazy lady stuff that's about to come, because there's a lot that's about to come. And we know that the CCA loves stories that are anti-drug.
Also worth noting here that this is pretty much what we get for introducing Puck. We don't get a backup piece like every other team member is going to get, explaining their origins and how kind of they came to be. That might be because he was part of Beta Flight initially. I mean, we really do get more explanation of Marina in the arc with the Master.
Well, yeah, because it was a 3-issue arc about her backstory, and Puck, instead of a backstory, we get to find out how he moves through the world now, and we get a feel for him as a person right now in his solo story, but nothing about his origin, nothing about him. I think that what Byrne really meant for this was much like Marina got the first 3 issues, and then that was explaining that. I think what he meant for was for Puck to say in these issues, I'm a dwarf. This is what I do. This is what you need to know about me. This is where I came from. And it just makes the further retcon in the future that much more baffling.
Well, and also it sets Puck up as something of a mystery box. Like, we know where he is now. We know that he was on Beta Flight. We know that he was about to be promoted to Alpha Flight.
He was tiger hunting in Nepal. He's been over and done things. He's the grizzled old veteran of the group, it seems.
Which opens up potential story opportunities down the line for, well, what is he a veteran of? Where do these things fit in? Where does he fit into other storylines? So, I mean, it's clever.
He fits the same role as Wolverine, that you have a guy with a long history that has never been fully fleshed out, and whenever you need a neat little hook or something or other, you can make it related to his past and tell some story. And this is exactly how Wolverine was characterized throughout the 80s. I like to think that JMH found him to join the flights by putting up a personals ad for JMH and Heather, saying that they were looking for a diminutive hirsute Canadian for filling out their throuple. And the reply was Puck, because he's a diminutive, hirsute Canadian with a mysterious past who engages in wet work. And really, I think he can fit that role for them, you know?
We spend so much time thinking about the personal lives and sex lives of these. Yeah, I mean, that might have been their way of trying to find Wolverine again, putting up a little bit of a signal, a little semaphore of a, hey, buddy.
Well, Wolverine joins a throuple with an attractive redhead and her milquetoast husband down the line as well. So, like, it's not like they're the only ones looking for this magic that they had captured before Wolverine had to flee Canada.
Right. No, and at this point, that throuple with Cyclops and Jean Grey hasn't developed yet. So this might have been, they might have decided that since they can't steal Wolverine back, they can seduce him back.
They're just creating the environment that makes it conducive to him staying.
Turns out this is the exact environment that welcomes Puck into Department H. Headcanon established.
Listeners, there is no indication that Puck ever was engaged in a throuple with JMH and Heather, although he will be desperately head over little tiny heels in love with Heather in about a year's worth of issues. The last few pages of this issue begin Shaman's backstory, and that continues into issue 6, so we're going to do that as a whole after we talk about Alpha Flight number 6, Snowblind, starring Snowbird. Same creative team, except layered by Michael Higgins and edited by Linda Grant instead of Denny O'Neil. Cover date January 1984. Fun fact, cover date January 1984 is Assistant Editors Month at Marvel. All the real editors were scheduled to be at the 1983 San Diego Comic-Con, so they turned the books over to their assistants.
The cover is Snowbird in the center of an otherwise all-white page, which is a artistic choice that continues in the interior. It's striking for its darkness. It's kind of like that great Aurora cover number 3, but obviously reversed, since that one was more about darkness and a black background sort of absorbing her.
Yeah, but there was a central female figure clearly in distress, and the details of what's going on around it use light and dark very interestingly. It's just this one doesn't use the dark.
As previously established, Snowbird's civilian alter ego is Corporal Anne Mackenzie with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Mackenzie, Northwest Territory. As this issue begins, she is being arrested by her boss for her mysterious absences from her post. She is escorted to her cell by a friendly and sympathetic coworker, Corporal Doug Thompson. As she sits in her cell, she narration explains to the reader that, quote, Guardian arranged for the creation of my Anne Mackenzie identity so that I would be more easily able to contact should Alpha Flight need me. But Anne Mackenzie is fast becoming a liability.
It's interesting that Anne Mackenzie isn't Snowbird. She isn't Clark Kent. She is a wholly invented person that isn't a lived-in character. Because while Clark Kent is an invented person, he is a lived-in character. She doesn't live as Anne. She doesn't go buy groceries. She doesn't do a book club. She shows up at her job to interact with human beings and find out how human beings interact.
As part of creating this identity, a deal was struck with the previous RCMP chief inspector to allow Snowbird the freedom to move around as a superhero, which seems like a really odd job choice for a cover identity. She has shifts and hours and would have to exist enough to qualify for a pension and healthcare and stuff.
Yeah, like a social security number or whatever the Canadian equivalent of that is.
A QR code that's like in the 616 Canada.
Yeah, it's just tattooed on the back of your neck.
Henry Rollins style.
People notice when you're not at your RCMP shift, this isn't Comcast customer support. So this seemed like locking her into a lot of time away from superheroing. But as we've established, JMH isn't great at this superhero stuff.
Also, it's worth pointing out that this whole idea of trying to contact her when she's needed, as we're about to see in this issue, she kind of senses when shit is hitting the fan. So this being able to call her up on the phone thing seems not necessary.
You know what it is? It's so that when it's not Great Beast related, because she's here for a reason. And that reason is to stop the great beasts. And JMH is like, that's great. We'll help you to stop the great beasts. You know, every once in a while, we might need to stop weirdos like the Master or, you know, maybe a bank robber in Ontario or something. So we're going to need to get a hold of you so that you can help us with our stuff while we help you with yours. So I think it's more trying to co-opt her into that Canadian dystopian superhero apparatus.
Or at least for our purposes, to co-opt her into that Canadian dystopian superhero apparatus.
Meanwhile, 40 miles to the north in what is already a recurring scene in Alpha Flight, an oil corporation is digging too greedily and too deep. Along with the oil that gushes up comes an immense swirl of power, and Kodiak, our second great beast, is free.
I was really hoping you were going to say the Balrog comes up, but
Well, I'm glad that you caught what I was trying to get at.
I mean, if I didn't catch what you were trying to get at, I'm not sure why we would be doing this podcast.
Recall that the great beasts are powerful creatures connected to the land that Canada sits on, and Snowbird is destined to stop them. They generally consider each other to be their greatest enemies and only united when trying to conquer Earth. Snowbird's mother and grandfather, Nelvana and Hodiak, banished the great beasts from Earth, but were also locked away from the mortal plane themselves. The great beasts have rivalries among themselves, and Kolomak's great rival is Tundra, the land, because Kolomak is able to be constrained by Tundra, the land. So if you get Kolomak underground, no problem. But these dipshit oil drillers went and opened up the land, and Kolomak was able to get out.
So basically the Balrog. Kolomak is a very large, hairy brute. On the arms and legs, looks a bit like a white Sasquatch, but his torso has more of a King Kong feel to it.
Skin, armor, and maybe both. It's like Bowser, you know?
His face is covered by what looks to be a vaguely indigenous-looking mask that doesn't move. Has pitch black eye holes and mouth holes.
Yeah, it's not clear now that this is a mask, but later on it will be clarified that he is able to possess a mortal and bring himself to this plane when the mortal puts on that mask. So the theory is that the reason that he is here instead of being banished with the other great beasts is that he got buried under the tundra before Kodiak and Nelvana sealed the great beasts away. And so his host, wearing the mask, was buried underground, and when the oil drillers dug down there, that is what is emerging here. So we're not seeing some pure platonic form of Kolomak here. This is Kolomak inhabiting a mortal. They just haven't told us that yet. So there's a deep dive I didn't expect to do today.
And that is not in the script, so that's interesting information. It also is interesting as well because Tundra, of course, was unleashed by the sacrifice of a human as well.
And that human was controlled by Tundra with a physical object that the human put upon his own body and then lost his own body to the great beast.
And as we get into Snowbird's backstory in our next episode, we'll kind of see again how all of these forces are using mortals in order to compete against each other. That they need that mortal, I don't know, access point, as it were.
Oh, yeah, no, there's a lot more about the great beasts and their motivations and whatnot that we'll get into, and we'll get into it before John Byrne leaves the series. So it's coming up, and I don't want to get too hung up on it. The important part is we have another great beast. This is our second one. Kolomak gets a stylized word balloon with jagged black and ice blue borders, which is kind of nice. So much like Tundra was the embodiment of the land and all its powers, Kolomak is the embodiment of winter.
Sensing a great beast, not getting a phone call or a telegram.
Or even an implant in her head, because we haven't seen that she has one of those
or a
either.
passenger pigeon. Or
is JMH just calling her at RCMP headquarters? Is he calling her apartment when he doesn't find her there? Does she have to submit her weekly schedule to JMH so that somebody knows where to find her when? None of this makes sense. James, you're not a good bureaucrat. This is why the government fired you.
Or a messenger Pine Marten, or a messenger Wolverine, or any of the messenger animals you can use in the Great North. She senses a great beast nearby and shows a previously unmentioned super strength, and smashes through the wall of her cell, leaving a confused Corporal Thompson to come check on her and wonder what in the hell just happened.
Poor Thompson. He's such a sweet boy with a receding hairline. Snowbird flies in and stares down Kolomak, telling him to look at her, quote, true fires. Her face is drawn like half normal, and then the other half is in really dark shadows and with a red eye. It's very evil looking. Kind of looks like the Spider-Peter motif from the Spider-Man books, because Stan wanted Spider-Man on every page. And Jack was like, no, man, we got to have some non-Spider-Man stuff here. So this was their solution to getting Spider-Man on every page, because Stan Lee was apparently JJJ, just demanding pictures of Spider-Man in his book. Kolomak recognizes the spirit of Hodiak, the power of Nelvana, but in this mortal form. We probably cut it out here, but I initially referred to Hodiak as Kodiak because John Byrne takes the names Hodiak and Nelvana from some 1940s Canadian comic book characters named Kodiak and Nelvana with one N in the back half. And he presumably had, read those lying around when he was a kid, and then repurposed these spirits in the same roles as being the gods of the North and father and daughter, and just plugged them directly into Alpha Flight and the Marvel Greater Universe. So there's a little neat tidbit.
It's an interesting thought that had the technology existed, John Byrne would have made a podcast about those comics and how they affected him, and taking those comics seriously.
John Byrne hates everybody. He would never put that much effort into lovingly explaining anything other than why he loves the Fantastic Four.
Fair enough. Kalamak unleashes his power at the child of his hated enemies, creating a whiteout landscape of snow and wind, and here is where Assistant Editor's Month really pays off.
Instead of drawing the fight and showing snow flying through the air and having the narration tell us how thick the snow is, the next 6 pages simply have no art. There are panels that imply scenes, there are narration captions and thought and word balloons and sound effects. The pages look just like a comic should, but there is no art at all.
The whole fight with Kalamak takes place in a whiteout blizzard, so that's what we get to see, and it absolutely works. The words and panels are exactly what would be on the page, even if there were art in the Marvel style both show and tell. Byrne just skips the show part here and lets the reader's imagination fill it in.
This could easily have been a lazy cop-out to avoid drawing a quarter of the issue, but it really works. The white of the snow makes it pop in a way that, if this were happening in perfect darkness, wouldn't. It's little style things like this that the long same creative team run lets happen. In looking into this one, I read that John Byrne had kicked around this idea with Frank Miller for a Daredevil issue from Matt Murdock's point of view, and it's all black. And then presumably just like when his powers activated, showing what was needed. There was also in the comic book What If number 34, cover date August 1982, a single panel gag that the title was What If Silver Surfer, White Tiger, Knight Rider, Iceman, and Moon Knight fought Wendigo in a snowstorm. And the panel was just white. And then there was also right next to it a black panel that reads, What if the Black Panther fought the Shroud in a coal mine? So the idea was floating around, but it took Assistant Editor's Month to get somebody to sign off on making it more than a joke. And I think that Byrne did a really great job of making this into a memorable art piece.
Also, not stepping into some potentially hazardous territory like that Black Panther one that seems potentially inappropriate.
Between Puck being a narc and the dwarfism, and then we've got the twins and all of their stuff in the next issue, and Walt and all of his repressed everything that he's got going on. I guess she is the least complicated of all of them, right?
Certainly is. I would very much agree with that. Once again, Snowbird is unsure if her lowly human body is enough to defeat the great beasts, and the whiteout helps us to see those stakes. As we don't see anything, here we are, magic of comics. As she tussles with the beast, he unleashes ice shards and cuts Snowbird, causing her to bleed for apparently the first time in her life.
Taunting Kalamak into unleashing his full fury on her, Snowbird tricks him into also attacking a sheer cliff face until it collapses on him and traps him again under his hated rival, Tundra. And we get another cool double-page spread here of the blizzard stopping as Kalamak is trapped. It is structured like when the Master's base blew up in issue number 4. The white gives way to the ruin of the cliff and the oil workers being bewildered to signify the storm ending. So Byrne's got a little bit of a template for page construction. It helps to give the book a look, but I can see where it might get stale if used too often, and I don't think it is. But tune in next time to find out.
Don't tune out because we have more to cover. I have absolutely no idea why Chris would say tune in next time now when the podcast isn't over.
I have no justification for my actions, Tom.
Glad to hear it.
Within this issue, there is a cutaway 2-page scene of Guardian flying home for a nice refreshing glass of iced tea where he finds a mysterious letter from the Roxxon Corporation. Now, for those of you who don't know, Roxxon is a legally distinct name for the Exxon Corporation in the 616. When you need an evil oil company, Roxxon is there.
I want a business card that says that.
I was looking at some new comic titles this month, and apparently Roxxon is involved in what is being published right now. It's the Roxxon Age of Comics, and I gotta tell you, I'm a little bit curious. And now, patient listeners, we come to this episode's origin story for Shaman in what Byrne named Death Watch, but I call Michael and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Set, quote, 15 years ago, so roughly 1968, we open with a young, clean-cut, and suited Michael Two Youngman in a rustic hut/living cabin with his ancient grandfather pleading with Michael to take up his destiny and learn the ways of his people.
His people being the Sarcee tribe, one of the First Nation tribes of Aboriginal Canadians. We make no pretense to being able to phrase things properly here, so please forgive us if we use the language from the page and say Indian from time to time. It's literally, in those cases, us quoting what's actually written down there.
So Michael's father died in World War II and is therefore unable to take on the mantle of the tribe's medicine chief, and his grandfather, approaching his death, is desperate to get his grandson to learn the ways of the Sarcee so they are not destroyed through cultural disruption.
Michael, however, has embraced cultural disruption. It reminds his grandfather that he, Michael, is a man of science and has been called the greatest surgeon in all of Canada. He wants nothing to do with this mumbo-jumbo and rudely leaves his grandfather behind to return to his life in, quote, the white man's world, end quote.
Look, that's what it says, and it won't be the last time.
That world is a quaint, quiet neighborhood in the growing city of Calgary, the kind of suburb-rural mix familiar to anyone on the edge of a growing city. We meet Michael's daughter, Elizabeth, and her babysitter, neighbor Heather McNeil.
So ages aren't giving, but I'm guessing Elizabeth is about 6 and Heather is about 12. So, old enough to need a babysitter and old enough to be a babysitter, but still definitely children.
But also, in Heather's case, totally striking distance from being a bride.
She is about one confederacy away from being married. Michael receives a call from his wife's doctor and receives some unspecified but very, very bad news. For the next several months, he throws himself into trying to solve his wife's unnamed malady and leans on Heather to care for Elizabeth more and more, as he promises Elizabeth that he'll find a way to save her mother, who is named Catherine, by the way, but not in this issue.
When he inevitably can't save her, and Catherine Two Youngman dies, Elizabeth angrily runs away from her father, saying he lied to her and that she hates him for not doing what he promised.
I gotta tell you, as a father who has dealt with kids and a parent's illness, this is a bit rough to read, and I'm not even a doctor trying to help. Heather's father tells Michael that he and his wife will look after Elizabeth while Michael deals with his grief and casually mentions that he read that Michael's grandfather died that same day.
Having turned his back on his heritage, Michael is now left with no family of his own and his faith in his abilities shaken apart. And that is what you get for being a character in a Marvel comic book, Michael.
No good comes from being at the whims of a writer's sadism for the sake of sales.
2 days after learning of his grandfather's death, an indigenous presenting unnamed stranger delivers a gift to Michael, a medium-sized cloth bag tied at the top with instructions not to open it until he knows it is time. And this is where part 1 of Shaman's origin ends. A nice, tidy cliffhanger.
Part 2 of Shaman's origin in issue number 6 is titled The Old Ways. We pick up with a very long-haired and forlorn-looking Michael Two Youngman in 1978 outside of Banff, Alberta, in the Canadian wilderness, where he has apparently been living on his own for the last 10 years.
Now, it's worth pointing out that in the previous issue, while very clean-cut and doctorly looking, Michael looks trim, looks fit, maybe a little thin.
Thin, yeah. He looked very much thin. He was not filled out. He was a doctor who had spent time doing all this shit, not stuff in the, yeah.
And here he looks like that, but even more so. I mean, he looks closer.
Gaunt.
Gaunt would be the word to use here. It's a very effective way of communicating the change that is about to come with Shaman. In our earlier encounters with Shaman, he looks athletic, he looks fit, he looks healthy and vibrant. He very much does not look like that right now.
And for very different reasons. That here, where we're picking up with him in the cabin, he looks haggard and gaunt. And prior to that, he didn't look healthy because he was busy being a doctor. He looked like a guy who didn't overeat, but, wasn't tending to his physical form.
After 10 years of solitude, it is now apparently time to open the bag. We learned that Michael had always considered his grandfather, and by extension his people's teachings, to make him something of an outcast and laughingstock in the modern world. Once his father died, he leaned hard into putting his heritage behind him and rose to the top of the medical field as a thoroughly modern man.
So imagine his surprise when he opens the bag and a full-body spirit rises up with the accompanying pyrotechnic show in his miserable little hut, leaving Michael cowering on the ground from the unknown. So this spirit is his grandfather, come to give Michael his birthright so he can save his people and by extension all of Canada. The spirit is projected from the completely boiled and stripped skull that was inside the bag, still wearing the headdress crown that grandfather presumably wore in life, though his spirit form is wearing a different version of it.
The skull is resting on an ordinary-looking satchel bag, which grandfather instructs Michael to reach into and remove a handful of pine needles. Michael complies and, withdrawing his hand, finds it empty. He goes to look inside to find the needles when his grandfather stops him and ominously states that he is to never look into the bag.
Mike is like Luke, who gets the lightsaber and immediately looks down the business end of it. This is your hope, Canada. The guy who's looking down the business end of a portal. Yeah.
Over the next several weeks, Michael learns much from his spirit grandfather. I guess that's one way of putting it. And apparently reconnects with his heritage. He also goes through quite the physical transformation as the next page shows him running through the woods, looking healthy. Like he's filling out. He has muscle on him. He doesn't look like a thin doctor who works too much.
And he doesn't look like a heartbroken man who's withdrawn from the world.
He looks like a physically healthy, middle-aged man, maybe the upper end of that healthiness. You know, the kind of guy that like could be a fitness influencer, but in everyday life looks normal, and then when he has a pump, is shredded.
Yes, and that's a good point, because what I was thinking was he has the air of self-discipline about him. That's the transformation that I've seen between Michael from his distraught form here, meets the skull, and then gets the self-discipline that his grandfather always wanted to teach him, that Michael thought, I'm going to school, I'm excelling at all these things, I am working extremely hard at these things, and grandfather taught him, no, that's not what self-discipline means. This is what self-discipline means, and his physical form reflects that.
Yeah, he totally nails his macros. He doesn't need the...
Well, he's the world's greatest, or Canada's greatest surgeon. He knows his nutrition, Tom.
He doesn't need intermittent fasting because he knows how to eat. He knows like when to eat. He doesn't...
Well, he's out in the middle of nowhere. He's catching his own fish, so he's eating 400 grams of protein a day, and that's it. And he's doing it all in one meal at 4:00 in the afternoon because he has to catch it all. So that's intermittent fasting right there.
He would be, carnivore, keto, whatever you want to call it, except for all the mercury in the goddamn fish from the oil company's runoff.
No. Canada is so goddamn big that he's in one of the places where that's not happening.
One of the few places where that's not
No,
happening.
It's so big that for all the places where it is happening, there's still more where it's not. Which is why everyone says, let's leave it alone. You know what? We're digressing.
So having altered his body and altered his mind, really in some ways bridging the various parts of his identity together, his grandfather's spirit declares that Michael has learned everything he can, and it is now time for Michael to try the pine needle test again. His grandfather says,
"Concentrate, O son of my son. Turn away your mind from the paths of the world beyond this room. Look instead inwards. Extend not your thoughts, but your feelings into the medicine bag. Do not think of pine needles. Know them. Touch them. Feel them. Smell them. Know the smoothness of their dark green surface, the cloying stickiness of their tips. Let them feel as real to you as the fabric of the bag against your left hand. Let them be real."
Grandpa missed his calling as an ASMR guy on TikTok. Michael removes his hand from the bag, opens it, and inside are pine needles. We get a great panel here of Doctor Strange and his mentor, the Ancient One, in the Sanctum Sanctorum on Bleecker Street in New York City, astrally observing Michael and declaring that he is a wise and powerful man. He will make a great shaman to his people, perhaps the greatest they have ever known. And this issue ends with the teaser for Snowbird's origin titled, "Let a Child Be Born."
I liked this little pop-up from Doctor Strange, and what this made me think of was, Tom, can you think of any other Marvel Comics Native American magic men who also are firmly grounded in the modern world?
No, but my awareness of Marvel is nowhere near yours. So
the X-Man Forge. And everyone knows that Forge is an inventor and can build any machine and any invention that anybody needs and intuitively understands all this stuff. But they forget that he is also the trained, equivalent here of what Michael Two Youngman is. And top of my head, I don't know that the two of them have ever met. But listeners, if you know of a time when Forge and Shaman have met, I would sincerely like to hear about that. So let us know, please. That leads us to this week's Alpha Flight patch. Excelsior Embroidery Company is producing a series of custom patches for Why Not based on what we're covering, and this week we see the Shaman face patch. Visit the whynotpod.com blog to see it and find links to all things Why Not around the web. And check out excelsiorembroidery.etsy.com for all your embroidered comic nerd needs like patches, towels, battle vests, and anything else soft enough to hoop. If you want to see some of these patches we've been talking about, the Excelsior Embroidery Company will be vending at the Geek Craft Expo St. Louis July 27th and 28th at Webster University. GCE is a great event I've exhibited at for years in St. Louis, Minneapolis, Indianapolis, and this year I'm going to Madison on August 24th and 25th. GCE is always a lot of fun. Come support your local nerd crafters and find something you won't see anywhere else. For more info, you can follow Excelsior Embroidery on Instagram or Etsy and geekcraftexpo.com or on Instagram as geekcraftexpo. If you come out to see me, mention the podcast and I'll have something special for you. Plus, you'll get to see my super cool Marvel Battle Vest. Hope to see you there.
Why Not is recorded in Chicago, Illinois, and deep beneath stately Baker Manor in a fashionable neighborhood outside St. Louis. It is produced by Tom Flynn with help from Chris Baker.
See you next time. I don't know if we even need one. I'm perfectly fine with moving from there to there, but if you've got something, I'm all ears.
No, I think it's fine.
Fucking needy cat. I just put a fucking toy out with fucking catnip on it, and she's still here. She's yelling worse than before, Tom. It's worse than it used to be. She's a shitty drunk, Tom.
She wants to be on the podcast. Don't leave me out.
I have important things to say about this. When are we going to cover the Captain Marvel stuff with Chewie?
Their depiction of mental health is inappropriate. I really hope that you get into
I find what you're saying to be problematic and think that you need to stop and check yourself.
All right.
Her middle name is Tumblr. Teeny Tumblr Baker.
Be better if it was Reddit.